I thought that the most notable line was the cost of waiting to see further data seem fairly low. Do you agree with that? Do you think that the cost is fairly low of simply being parked on the sidelines at a time where a lot of people think that there are signs of a rapidly slowing economy?
Well, I think the costs are low relative to the risk of making a mistake. Let's imagine the Fed cut rates dramatically because they were worried about the labor market, and then it turned out that inflation expectations got unanchored and the labor market held up pretty well. That'd be a big mistake. And so the Fed really wants to make sure that they don't go down that path. This is not just about the central scenario. It's also about risk management. Try not to do the wrong thing so that you can respond effectively as things actually unfold. So I think the fact that the tariff policy is not set is important. And the fact that we don't have any experience with a tariff shock of this magnitude is also important. So in that environment, it's sort of like, the Hippocratic oath, do no harm to your patient.
Bill Dudley, part of your charm is you had a day job before the Fed job of actually trying to forecast out the economy. How would you frame that now? You've got the luxury of not being at Goldman Sachs. Can you look out 1 month? Can you look out 2 quarters? Can you model out a fancy McKelvey-Dudley jewel out a year right now? I don't think you can.
No way. I mean, I think the only thing we can say is that the economy, like Chair Powell said, is the economy right now seems to still be in good shape. I think the most important thing I took away from the press conference that people should take on board is the fact that don't take the first quarter GDP at face value. The minus 0.3 reading is all because of mismeasurement. It's basically they counted imports a lot better than they counted inventories. So there was a big drag from imports that was not offset by a big accumulation of inventories. And domestic private final sales, which he brought up repeatedly in the press conference, is really a much more representative measure of how the economy is doing, and it's doing just fine, rising 3%. So I think he put the weight on the right things.
I'd point out Jan Hasius with a 2% statistic for this present quarter, published, I believe, last weekend. Bill Dudley, how does the Fed communicate given this mess that has been wrought? What do they do in speeches coming up? John and I were talking here as we were looking at PSG Arsenal about Jackson Hole. How do they get to Jackson Hole and communicate to the nation?
Well, you can only communicate to the extent that you actually know what's actually going on. So I think it's appropriate for the Fed not to overpromise or imply that they have some crystal magic ball that allows them to see in the future when the future is actually very cloudy. What I'm expecting at Jackson Hole, frankly, is the Fed to talk about their monetary policy framework review and wheel that out. And I thought some of the questions at the press conference on that were interesting, where Powell admitted that maybe QE could have been wrapped up a bit sooner. So I think they understand that there are some things that they can improve in the monetary policy framework. And so I think that's going to be the most interesting outcome of Jackson Hole.